crushing the eggs. So do we have, Uncle Kasozi, do we have an alternative to this crushing? And we have written about violence exhaustively in Uganda. We have shown how the eggs, the people try always to smash the eggs to make an omelette, but they have never made that omelette. I think the challenge, and you could respond to this in later writings, is to find a way that suits us. I'm sorry Professor Juko is not here, but he sees another alternative. Let us negotiate our being a nation. You see, Uganda, and I repeat this and I've repeated it elsewhere, was a colonial project. It was never ours, right? It was a British project. They made the boundaries. At one time, we went as far, Uganda went as far as Nakuru, and this was shrunk in 1902, and again shrunk in 1926. That's when we finally got our final boundaries as Uganda. And I think in 1963, our leaders, very few of them, who formed the Organization of African Unity, made a mistake. They said that the colonial boundaries would remain our national boundaries. But some countries have gone out of that. Sudan is one example. Ethiopia, with the creation of Eritrea and so on, is another example. But I think, you see, you waste a lot of time fighting, killing people, destroying property, and you don't move anywhere. And you cannot blame Uganda for not developing, because we have not had peace. Half of that time have been, the war in the north lasted 20 years. Then between 81 and 86, we had another war. And there was a state of emergency in Uganda between 66 and 71. So how could we develop in a state of fear? So I think, and Mayanja is not here. Mayanja and his ilk could have thought of another model and worked on it. But I don't see how we can get out of this at this time. I'll stop by quoting Stalin. You know, we have had plenty of elections in Uganda for the last 30-something years. But Stalin said that the electorate does not matter. It is those who count the votes who matter. Can you repeat that? Yes. These are not my words. They are Stalin's words. He said that the electors do not matter. Those who matter are the ones who count the votes. All right? Now, we have had these elections, and we are supposed to foster democracy through them. But I think the best way forward for us is to sit at a table and sort out our problems. Now, finally, federalism is an emotive word in Uganda, but it's simply a system of governance. And the mistake the Mayanjas made in 1961-62 was to demand federalism for Buganda That was a big mistake alone. It could have been federalism across the board. And what is interesting is that in 1995, the Odochi report says that 67% of Ugandans wanted a federal system of governance. And I'm very weak at mathematics, but I thought that was a majority. But but nothing happened. And of course, now this may sound a bit parochial. I think many Ugandan nationalists premise their nationalism on Baganda phobia.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much for an injection of current political behavior. I am not going to spend time, a lot of time on the comments of my two discussants. I feel they've done a very good job, and I do accept with Joseph Kasule that a lot of ground needs to be done. Indeed, I think I told everybody that this is just a beginning. We are just beginning. One step, and other steps will come. Now, I think Kasule suggests a very good way of looking, a very good alternative, not the only way, of studying the activities of Mayanja and placing him within the context of Uganda by looking at the challenges this country has had during the period of Mayanja and how Mayanja resolved these contestations. I have no problem. This is a very good way to do it. In fact, this book that you see has a lot of primary sources, and I encourage Joseph Kasule to go ahead and focus on the debates, the political debates that this country has had, and write another book. And if I'm still around, I definitely would like to come and discuss that book. I have no problem. So the Mayanja as a historical person within the context of Uganda, I think is a very important aspect, and I think I agree with you, Kasule, that you've noted it, and I do accept your comments. I also accept Professor Runyigo's comments, except that I'm not going to use to comment about, I will only deal with the issues dealing with the Mayanja's activities in the period they acted, not what is happening in Uganda here and the elections that we may have or may not have lost. But I do think you've contributed very much to understanding, to our understanding of the paper. Now, I do agree that apparently, it was apparent that Mayanja said one thing and did other things elsewhere. For example, that he opposed the traditional authority but worked with the traditional authority. But I think he confessed as I said, that there was no way of getting independence, because the aim of most of the politicians in those days was to get independence, and his participation was aimed at independence, at getting independence. Now, I do realize that your criticism that he fell short of realizing Max Weber's statement that it's the organization that controls the means of violence that can claim legitimacy to a given part of the land, that most of our politicians fell short on realizing that the army was quite important. That's correct. But if you do read this book, you'll find Mayanja arguing on who would control the army with Obote. Very long section. And Mayanja felt that the president should not be the commander-in-chief operating in the field. So, but I think they took the army for granted. In those days when the colonial state was here, you never saw the army. We didn't know there was an army. We never saw it. So I think they didn't take this into account, and I think they all fell short of realizing that power grows out of the barrel of the gun. You know, they didn't do that. Now, I would disagree with you that you can't establish a liberal democratic state in Africa. At least there are components of liberal democracy that many African states have implemented. They've had regular elections where counting has been relatively contested, but genuinely, on the whole, quite correct. And the countries like, to some extent, Kenya, I wouldn't say, some extent Tanzania, South Africa, have had elections. Ghana, I do remember one election in Ghana where one person was ahead by 0.5, and the other person accepted that these are elections. So some components of liberal democracy can be established, and I think we shouldn't give up on that. We should have regular and fair elections, and that can be had, and that's part of the Western. We can have a functioning judiciary, and that is part of the Westminster model. Now, parliament, yes, you are right. In most of Africa, parliament is a rubber stamp, and the executive has usurped its power. But in some areas, it has not. You know, there are cases where parliament, the judiciary has ruled against the parliament in Africa. I think I think yes. Mayanja's hope was not of optimistic. So yes, at that time there was a rush to get independence, and I think Mayanja and others were trapped. And I said from the beginning, and I say it in the book, that he was ahead of his colleagues, but doesn't mean that he was miles away from his colleagues. There are certain areas where he was with them, and many of those. So I do accept that I didn't bring that out. But as we have prospective books on Mayanja, my hope is that all these will be corrected. So I don't think it is impossible to establish a democratic state in Africa. I think one thing that people have not commented on too much, the two co-discussants, is that most of what I've written in this book are hopes of Mayanja as exhibited on the floor of Parliament and his speeches. And before going to Parliament, his ideas were not quite distinctly refined. Thank you very much.
So we are going to open the floor for questions. Please just ask one question and keep it brief. We'll take 5 in the first round and then come back. But just one question. If you ask more than one, I will cut you. Just raise your hand and introduce yourself. Just say where you are from.
Can I sit here? Oh, what's this? Somewhere he was being mentioning guns.
Yes. Say your name and where you are from and ask the question.
Yes, my name is Nakamyuka Nora from College of Humanities and Social Sciences, Department of History. My question is, first of all, I want to acknowledge the presence of Professor Golola and Professor Chiwan, who has just left. My question is, this is not the first time that I'm attending Dr. Professor's launch about this book. This is actually the 3rd time. And one thing that has not always been clear is Mayanja's position. What was his political ideology? Was he a monarchist? Was he, in your book on page, I think on the first 2 pages, on the 2nd page, you say he was referred to as the Edmund Burke. We very well know Edmund was the father of conservatism. And you say he was a liberal democrat. The speeches that you quote of Abu Mayanja, there's one that he said in 1958, independence of self-government should not be handed to traditional leaders. And in the same year, he said that self-governance or independence may or may not include kings. Yet he was one of the people that advocated for the formation of the Hanoli alliance between UPC and KY and Kabaka Yeka. So what was Abu Mayanja? Many people have written about Abu Mayanja, and I quote, these are not my words. Jonathan Al he describes Abu Mayanja as he was driven by his irresponsible sense of fun in politics. Carl Summer describes Abu Mayanja as an irresponsible and reckless politician. Though Dr. Kasozi tries to refute this and discard this. In the first few chapters, the first few pages of this book, we try to separate Abu Mayanja from Uganda. He was not a monarchist. He said he was, after he was advocating for a